Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to At the Table with Tom and Eric, a show about the people who play games. My name, Tom Vassell.
And my name is Eric Summerer. Our guest at the table today is no stranger to fans of the Dice Tower, as he is a panelist for the channel, as well as the host or co-host of the tangentially board game-related podcast, Sporadically Bored with Mike and Dan. Please welcome Mike Dilisio. Hello, Mike.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thrilled. And you could have just kept it at host. We don't need to mention any other co-host. We'll keep it at host.
We won't mention that he's been here before you. So, yes.
This is true. He had to blaze the trail that I am now going to carry forward.
So we have a jam-packed show up ahead. We're going to talk about ranch dressing. We're going to talk about how to pronounce your name correctly. But before we get to any of that, Tom, we should probably talk about this convention that we're heading to in the next couple of days. Yeah, the three of us will be
in the same place for the first time since, I don't remember the last time we were together.
The Dice Tower retreat, I would imagine.
I tried to expunge that. That actually isn't that long ago, but it feels like a really long time. We are... Sorry, I forget what we're talking about now. PAX Unplugged. That's happening Thursday, which is this week. Normally, I'm much more stressed about a con, but I'm just this one is just getting stuck in there. We're staying at a big house. We're going to go to the con. I have no expectations for this con. We're going to be selling promos and stuff at our booth. We'll say hi to people, and then we'll leave. But somewhere in there, I'm eating a cheesesteak. And a donut.
Go to the North Market.
And a donut and two donuts. Not the North Market, Mike. That's Ohio.
Oh, that's Origins. What is this one called? The
Reading Market.
The Reading Terminal.
Market.
Reading Terminal. Yes.
Now, Eric, Tom and I just kind of piggybacked along, already looked at the different choices of donuts at the Amish bakery there. Have you had any of those yet?
I have not. I usually head to the crepe place, and so that's I make a beeline for the crepes.
Why not both?
Why not? Indeed. All right, Tom, do you have our booth number handy for those who are going to be in PAX?
No.
Let me see if it's in the document here. Hold on one second.
Wait, why would you? Is it in the document? Did Eric put it in the document?
It's not. I thought it might be, but it is not.
I didn't.
All right.
No.
Well, anyway, we're there.
We'll find out when we get
I meant the PAX document, Tom. I meant the PAX document. It is not in there either.
Wait, we have a PAX document? I'm super confused
now. We have a booth schedule.
I know I'm scheduled. Someone scheduled me to work the booth at some point.
Oh, that document. Okay. Anyway, folks,
we should probably put it in there.
We're in the back, in the middle. So if you go to the very middle, and then in the back, that's where we are. I know where we are on the map.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's get to talking about Mike. Why don't we?
I was avoiding this as much as possible, but yes.
Look, Tom, I mean, we could continue talking about donuts if you like. I mean, that dovetails.
To be fair, I could do a whole hour on donuts.
Story.
I could do a whole hour on donuts. So we probably shouldn't.
So when you first remember eating a donut, Mike? No, that's not the question. So we know that you are, of course, in Florida, very close to Dice Tower headquarters at the moment. And when we first met, you were living in the Indianapolis area. But correct. I know that's not your origin story. Where did you grow up, Mike?
I grew up in Southern California, and it sounds so, what's the word, like fancy. I grew up in North Hollywood, but I was born in Hollywood, California, right, which sounds very glamorous. But it was not glamorous at all. I was born in Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Hollywood, lived in the San Fernando Valley most of my growing up years, went to North Hollywood High School, and lived in California up until my early 20s.
And then you went straight
World War II broke out. And
here we go. How long did it take? What time is it? We are 3:05 at the time of this recording, folks. Mark that down. That Tom took 5 whole minutes before taking a jab at my advanced age.
I love how I take so many jabs at Mike's age, and he's like, what, 4 years older than me?
I know.
It's not even that far.
Also, and I can't stress this enough, I'm not a grandfather, unlike Tom Vassell. So I did not go directly to Indianapolis from California. I actually lived for a little while in Connecticut, Eric,
really?
In Greenwich, but not Greenwich like you think of. This was basically, you could see Port Chester, the little thing for Port Chester, New York, from where we lived. So it was more Port Chester than Greenwich, but I lived there for a little while. Lived in Las Vegas, actually, for a while, too. That's where I moved to Indiana from, was Las Vegas.
So all over the place.
All over.
Looking back, what is your earliest memory you can see yourself playing a game? What is your earliest gaming experience?
Well, it would probably be something like, playing Clue. I certainly have memories of playing Clue, but the gaming memory that I have the most fully formed and meaningful that I still think back on from time to time would be going to my grandmother's house, and that was where we would play the games most often. Like, we would play board games at home on holidays and such, but we would go to my grandmother's house for dinners on weekends every so often, and we would always play games. My grandmother and I would play like simple games early on, like dice games. There was a game called Zilch that I used to love, and I'm sure it's way out of print. But what I most remember is watching the adults play Pinochle. They used to play Pinochle all the time, and I would just sit there and watch. And I got old enough to understand kind of what was happening, and I just remember being so proud when I was finally at a point where I could actually sit at the table and play Pinochle, and maybe not be terribly competitive, but I wasn't messing the game up. I wasn't, you know what I mean? I was able to make reasonable plays, things along those lines. So that's probably the earliest memory of gaming that sticks to this point.
So how long do you think it was that you were watching them play and wanted to join in, but weren't allowed to?
It probably would have been over a year, but they were pretty good about, like, it was never like they weren't like super patronizing about it. It was more just, it was almost, I self-regulated. I didn't want to join in until I felt like I could. I don't think they would have discouraged me too much. Like, they probably would have at least humored me for a hand or two. But I once I felt like I could figure out what was happening without having to ask too many questions. And you pick up the terminology, right? You pick just from them talking melds and tricks and all this kind of stuff, you pick that up. And through context, you can kind of figure it out. And I would ask questions from here to there, but I want to say it was over a year before I felt comfortable sitting down and playing.
It does seem like it's a common theme with the folks that we've talked to here on the show that trick-taking card games seem to be that early memory, whether you were able to join in or not. That's a very common. And we've also noticed, we were talking before we started about the difference between the kids today and our gaming experiences, and how trick-taking card games aren't nearly as ubiquitous in the background of some of our younger folks that we've talked to about the gaming world.
Yeah, I almost feel like right now trick-taking is kind of a what's the right word? I sound particularly old when I use the word hip, but it seems like trick-taking right now is kind of being used as a nice little, riff on trick-taking, or trick-taking used to propel something else in a game. I feel like trick-taking is coming back around a little bit. I mean, obviously the Crew is a huge mega success. As much grief as I get about saying it's going to be a flash in the pan, I still have another couple of years that I can have plausible deniability there.
I don't know that it. I mean, it might be hip in board gaming world, but I think 10, 20 years from now, people our age then are not going to look back and look at trick-taking as, I don't know many quote-unquote non-gamers who are trick-taking these days. They're playing other things, maybe Catan or
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think there's some regions, though, where, like, I can tell you talk about polar opposites. I sat and I watched and I learned for Pinochle all these years. And then we were talking about living in Indiana. I moved to Indiana, and I want to say, I'm not exaggerating, within the first week of living there, I had people trying to get me to play euchre.
Oh, yes.
And I had not heard of euchre before. It was completely unfamiliar to me, but they described it as a trick-taking game. And I'm like, okay, well, I've played a lot of trick-taking games, so how difficult could it be? I sat down, and it's a team game from what I remember, and it was 4 players, and someone drew the short straw, and they were my partner. And all I remember from that was that it felt like all the tricks, like they'd have a full hand of cards, and after 1 or 2 cards were played, it was like everybody knew what was going to happen for the rest of the 8 or 10. They're just throwing cards. I'm like, is this 52 pickup? I have no idea what's going on. So I think there are certain regions in the country that have some trick-taking games that are kind of unique to them, maybe.
Euchre is certainly part of my background as well, growing up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I totally get what it's almost like this bubble. And once people who know euchre really know euchre, and
I guess,
and you certainly can get the partner who's like, "What are you doing? Don't you understand all of these extra conventions?" It's almost like you need to take a class to learn the rules first.
Right.
So when would you first consider yourself a hobbyist? When was this like more than just something you do at grandma's house on occasion or on holidays?
Relatively late, actually. In my late 20s, early 30s, I was introduced to, Tom, you just mentioned it a moment ago, this is the very cliche answer of, at the time, Settlers of Catan. And, my mind was absolutely and completely blown, right? Like the idea of a victory point, completely foreign to me.
It's true.
Never heard of it before. No idea, right? The negotiation aspect. I mean, there had been other games where maybe like Risk and things, you have a little bit of that, but being built into kind of the game the way it was. And so I just remember that experience was so impactful that within a couple of weeks, I went to a local game store and was, first of all, completely blown away by how many games were out there, right? I had no idea that this was a thing. And I bought Lost Cities. That was the first game I bought as a hobby gamer. And it didn't take too long to go jumping down the rabbit hole.
That's why you're in love with Knizia. Oh.
You may be right, actually. I hadn't really thought about that kind of, nostalgic element.
Reiner Knizia is the background on Mike's computer.
Reiner Knizia is the background. Excellent.
Yeah.
Is it of you and him?
No.
I wish. So
Mike was too afraid to talk to Knizia Essen.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll you don't mind diverting a little bit, right?
Sure, why not?
So Essen on Wednesday has a press day, basically, where you can go down into this room, and most of the publishers, or many of the publishers, have their big games set up, and you can look at them and talk to the publishers and, get pictures and all this kind of fun stuff. Well, Reiner Knizia was walking around, and he's hard to miss, with the bow tie, if nothing else. Yep. And Tom and Z both came up to me and said, "Hey, there's Reiner Knizia. Why don't you go say hi?" And I walked up to him, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. It wasn't necessarily fear. I'm being truthful here. If it was fear, I would have said it. It was more that I was like, this guy gets bugged constantly, right? Just all day, he's got people coming up to him, telling him how much they admire his stuff. Yeah, I didn't want to be another one,
Well, if you tell me to work for the Dice Tower, he would have different words for you, because that's not what he said to me.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to meet him organically at the booth. Well, you already know him, Tom, but that would have been the ideal way for me to meet him, I think.
So, Mike, when you and I first met, you were a school teacher in Indy.
Yes.
Was that your first career, or did you travel around first before settling in teaching?
He was a model.
That was my. What's that?
I said he was a model.
Well, far be it from me to say that, Tom. But no, that was my first actual career. I don't know if that's true. I guess it depends on how broad your definition of a career is. I worked in retail as in management. Well, originally just sales, working at a mall, multiple malls. And then I got into management back in the days, kids. There used to be stores that sold music, physical artifacts of music that you could listen to. And I worked in music stores for many years, actually almost 20 years. And eventually, like I said, got into management and did that. But I eventually decided that is not something you're going to probably do, for many, many, many years. It has some benefits, but it also has some big drawbacks. Working on a retail schedule is not ideal for me. So I went to school. I had toyed around. I'd taken a semester at UNL, a couple of semesters at UNLV. I had done some classes at community college in California. But it was when I moved to Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, which is the home of Indiana University, that I finally said, okay, I'm going to go the student loan route. I'm going to get into debt. And I'm going to go into this. I originally was going to be an English teacher. That was the original plan.
And then what did you?
And then I became a social studies teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as both of you are former teachers, I want to know who is better at teaching games. You or Tom?
The short answer is Tom. However, I will say this. I think there are some players that would prefer my teaching method, because here's, it's going to be hard to say this without sounding like I'm kissing up to the boss here. Maybe I'm kissing up to the boss. I don't know that I've met somebody that is more succinct at getting the rules across while still getting the rules across, right? Tom is really good at, you don't feel like you're going to sit there for 45 minutes. I'm the guy that is going to probably teach more of the rules than maybe you even need up front. That's just the way my brain works. I feel I'm always worried that there's going to be someone in the middle of round one who feels like the game is ruined because I didn't mention something that they came across. So I tend to be more verbose and in every way, but in teaching games too. But short answer, Tom.
Mike is a fine teacher. Ignore that nonsense. I will say I'm better at Mike out the box. Mike is terrified out of the box. He wants to know the game inside out before he teaches it. I'll be like, I don't know if I know it. We're going to figure it out anyway.
We'll all learn together.
True. Were you that way as a teacher too, Mike? Like, did you want to know the lesson inside and out before you taught it? No, I'm serious, because I would.
What do you want to hear, Tom? The short answer, again, no. That did not carry over to my teaching.
Because I just opened the book and taught. So.
Yes, that was very well, especially in I can't speak to math. I didn't teach math, and thank God for all the poor children who didn't have to try to learn math from me. But in social studies, there's just so much, right? It's just information after information. And so to me, what I more tried to do is I would put time in at the beginning of a unit. You know what I mean? So that I was had certain themes that I wanted to make sure I came across. I wasn't going to sit there and pour over extensive notes and things along those lines. I had notes that I would give, to students, but I wouldn't spend hours and hours preparing for each individual lesson. There's not a chance.
All right. Well, we're already way off track. So let's get things focused to our big question for the episode. And Mike, you are our expert for this discussion. And I rather cheekily presented this as, does every game need a solo mode?
Right.
You are known as a solo board gamer. Yeah, just say no and go. But we often, the stereotype is occasionally a game is announced, say a Kickstarter project or a game is released, and one of the first questions that will pop up in discussion boards or on that Kickstarter thread is there a solo mode? And sometimes there isn't at the time, and then there's this pressure for the creators sometimes to make one, or for the community to create one as quickly as possible. And so the cheeky question, does every game need a solo mode?
Yeah, well, obviously by asking it in this format, the answer is no. Clearly not. You want to try to play Blood on the Clock Tower solo? Probably not a good idea.
You better be careful, Mike. You never know. There might be some variant out there that you don't know about.
Someone's figured it out.
I would not be surprised. I actually, as much as I enjoy solo gaming, and I have some pretty specific reasons why it's been a big part of my, what sound very pretentious, my journey through the hobby. It does not fit for every game. It doesn't fit for many games. And I 100% mean this. I would much rather have no solo variant in a game than a bad one, or one that was shoehorned in to kind of appeal to a larger market. because that is not doing anybody any good. All that's doing is you're disappointing the people that were expecting a viable solo variant, and you're probably taking away from the game as a whole, because maybe you're investing time and resources into something that shouldn't even be there to begin with. There's also a financial element too, where I know Tom has mentioned in the past, and I don't disagree in the least, that if you have zero interest in a solo variant, you're still oftentimes paying some percentage of the retail price for components that might be specific to solo. Usually, I doubt that it's a tremendous amount, but something I have seen happen a little bit more recently, and I'm all for it, especially when you get into crowdfunding, is have the game, have whatever the pledges are for that, and then have a solo variant that if you want it, you pay an extra $5 or $10, and it comes with its own, it doesn't even have to be in a box. I mean, I've had this happen before where it's just a baggie of extra components that get put into the game, and I'm paying an extra $5 for it. I have zero problem with that, and I got to think that the people that have no interest in ever playing it solo really appreciate that. So that's one aspect of why I don't think that games need solo modes, all of them.
I like that idea, Mike, but I do worry that would cause a decent amount of logistical nightmare to the company.
Yeah, it might. Sure.
But there is a designer you have to pay. Even it's not just components. If, let's say, you hire David Turtsey or someone else to do the solo. And again, I think I wouldn't argue that a solo should be taken out of most games, but there are definitely games where me and Mike have both looked at each other and been like, why is solo in this game?
Right. There's no reason for it. I will say that I've been surprised at, every so often I'll think there's no way that this game should be able to work solo. And so I will get impressed at the ingenuity of some of the solo designers or game designers that find a way to make a really legitimately good solo variant in like an area control game, for example. That should be very difficult to pull off, and kind of is. Even a drafting game, to be able to kind of make that work. And there are ways to do it. I think there are some games that would be very, very difficult to pull off solo and pull out, like social deduction or even auction games. How are you going to make that work, right? Trick-taking games. I have seen solo trick-taking. It's odd, very odd, but I've seen it tried.
Do you feel that sometimes the solo variant basically teaches you to play a different game from the the multiplayer version? Like you almost need to learn a separate set of rules. I'm thinking of the Race for the Galaxy solo variant. Felt
the bot, yeah.
Playing that bot was very different from playing any, competitors and trying to suss out what they wanted, because it was much more of a random thing. Yep. Do you find that happens a lot?
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you brought that up. That's a good point, is that my favorite solo variants are ones where you still feel like you're playing that game. There are sometimes you can have good experiences. Like I even like the solo experience, but it feels like you're playing a different game in many ways. You have the same components. You might have some mechanical elements that are the same, but the experience doesn't feel anything like it. I would 100% agree that playing the bot in Race for the Galaxy feels nothing like playing Race for the Galaxy, right? It's just not the same game. Mechanically, you're doing the same thing, got the same components, but the experience is nothing alike. So I mean, some people argue it's a good experience. I don't even know that, it's been so long since I've played that. I wouldn't even argue one way or the other, but I will say it does not feel like you're playing Race for the Galaxy.
Where do you land on, Mike, when it comes to the solo experience is too much work? So it's like sometimes, you flip a card over, like we were just talking today about Heat, the New Days of Wonder, and you can flip a card and run like 6 cars, that aren't yours, and it runs really smooth and really fast, and it requires you to flip a single card, while other games have big giant boards for the different AIs that you're going up against with decks of cards. Like, is there a point where sometimes you go, that's too much, or do you like them more complex?
There's definitely a point where it's too much. Very much can be because you have the mental overload of learning the game, right? And this is mostly the case with complex games, Euros primarily, where you have to internalize that rule set, right? And then you have another separate whole administration process that you have to keep in mind for too. So you're almost going through two parallel experiences. It's like, okay, here's my turn, right? Here's the 15 different things that I can do on my turn. So let me go through all of those. All right, my turn's done. Here's the bot. Now, okay, flip the card, put it on this spot, check this icon. Okay, is that icon? No, go to. It gets to be too much. So I guess it's as maybe reductive as it sounds. I want them to feel elegant, even if they're complex, because there are some elegant solo variants that still provide an experience that is robust and allows you to have a lot of different interaction points. I think that's where solo variants get really, really complex, is when you have multiple interaction points, which you would have between players. And now you've got to replicate that with, sometimes you'll even be running multiple bots, right? Which is even more. My kind of rule of thumb,
yes.
My rule of thumb is I do not want to be spending more time on the AI's turn than I do on mine. And I'd prefer it to not even be close. I'd much prefer that the 80% of the time that I'm playing this game is on my turn, my strategy, what am I doing? 20% of the time, I'm flipping a card and going through the motions and doing what it says. And when they're done well, even in complex games, that's how they work. So, but they can get way too complicated.
So you don't mind when it's just very simplified, and instead of them taking a whole turn, they're just put these workers on these two spots, block those spots, do this.
No, not at all. Yeah. No, I don't mind that at all. And worker placement, that's a very easy, like one of the first kind of acclaimed, this is probably, I shouldn't say this because it's probably inaccurate, but for me, one of the early solo experiences I was so impressed by was the Automa Factory for viticulture. I mean, you're literally flipping over a card and putting some dummy workers out there to block spots. That's really all that needs to do, right, in that game. And you could still kind of go through your engine and do your thing. Would they, those same solo designers, would they design viticulture solo today the same way? I highly doubt it. But I bet they wouldn't add too much more upkeep on your turn. So I don't have a problem with a relative. Actually, I'd prefer a simple solo system as long as it still can make you feel like you've got something you have to consider. And this is another big controversy, is too strong of a word, but I'll use it, in the solo gaming community, which is, are beat your high score variants okay, or do you have to have a automated opponent, an AI opponent? And I used to be much more kind of rigid about this when I first started kind of getting into solo gaming and doing content before the Dice Tower. I used to be very much about, hey, those beat your high score variants, those aren't as good as AIs. And over time, I've come to accept that that's not necessarily the case. There are certain games that work better with kind of a high score variant or a score matrix. Puzzly games, for example, those games work great because really what you're doing is you're just kind of solving a puzzle. And you've had those things for years where you do a puzzle in like the news. Back in the day, kids, there was something called a newspaper. Like in the newspaper, you'd have those little things, and they'd have those little score matrix there, for that too. So I've really come around on the idea that certain games, those work fine. Other games, I probably would prefer to have an AI opponent. It just depends on the game.
So you're okay with a score chart that says if you get between this score range, that's a B+.
I hate those so much.
It depends on the game. If it's a strict puzzle game, yes. The other thing though is that you can hybridize that, and that's what's been happening a lot more lately, is that instead of just a matrix, a score matrix, you have things like objectives you're trying to complete. That's so easy to do in a solo game, and it can give you a win-loss condition because a lot of people really want to have a win-loss condition, and I get that. Yeah. Again, I used to be that way. I used to be like, how do I know if I've won? You can do that with objectives and things along those lines of like, hey, you've got 5 objective cards that you lay out at the beginning of the game. To be considered a success, to be considered a win, you have to complete 3 out of those 5s. those 5 objectives. If you complete 4, it's a good victory. If you complete all 5, it's a great victory. I'm fine with that, right? Depending on the game.
All right.
How are you on the
go ahead,
now I've been derailed now. So completing a win-loss condition and then for your next game following it, making it more difficult. Like I'm thinking of Agricola's solo mode where you have to reach a certain score and then you get some sort of reward, and now the score threshold is farther along, and you have to be better each time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I have no problem with that. Again, depending on it works for Agricola for sure. Yeah, that's always nice too. And that's another aspect we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but it's important to me for solo variants, and I think you've even mentioned something like this, Tom, maybe in a different way, to have a very easily scalable difficulty. You talk about it more in co-ops. That oftentimes they make co-ops too hard, and co-ops can very often be played, pure co-ops can always be played solo just about. But it's important to me for solo variants to have easily scalable difficulty.
All right. Now, Tom, I know, was watching the clock and wanting to keep things focused and on track here. So we have some questions that have been pre-submitted, folks just clamoring to ask you things, Mike. And so we should start with a question from Christopher, who says, how different is your current gaming group or groups in Florida from your old gaming groups in Indiana? How are they the same?
Well, they're different in the sense that the Florida gaming group are essentially my work colleagues. And so that changes the dynamic a little bit. And oftentimes, although not always, the focus of those gaming sessions are different than they were when I was in Indiana. Although I was creating some content in Indiana, but it was usually solo focused. And so it wouldn't necessarily be a lot of crossover with what I was playing versus what I might be doing a video about. So in Florida, people I work with, oftentimes having a focus on this is something that we're going to be reviewing, kind of going through that process. The other difference is that I have gained a much larger appreciation for party games since I've moved to Florida and played with this group. This is not to say that the groups, I had multiple groups in Indiana. It's not to say that these people were not, fun into like those, but those just didn't tend to be the games that were played as often. And I think I had a bit of a prejudice almost against, that sounds like it's too strong of a word, but no. I just used to just straight out say, I don't like party games, right? I used to just say that as a matter of course. It's not true. I mean, I've come to find that I really appreciate party games, as a part of the whole menu, of board games. So that's a big difference. I will say Indiana, and I'll say this, thank goodness that I have people I work with that play games in Florida, because it doesn't have this, at least this part of Florida does not have as vibrant of a gaming scene as there was in Indiana. I cannot tell you how many different groups that I was interacting with and playing with. I had a couple of my regular groups, but so many people in Indiana played board games. Like it was a feast of people, of options, basically.
And now you're stuck with these guys.
I'm stuck with these people, and so it's like looking at the same people every day. You get a little tired of it, but no. So that's been a big difference. Is that this is a much more focused. Now I know that there is a Miami board games group, and I've gone to a couple of those nights, and it's been great. I mean, the one thing that is the same, and I know I'm going to sound like I'm being patronizing here, but this is absolutely true, is that they are fantastic people in both places, and I've been very lucky to have a chance to play games and to be in game groups with people that I legitimately enjoy. So that's been a similarity. Difference has been I play different types of games and for a different purpose here than I did in Indiana.
All right. Jerry has a question about the upcoming holidays. What was your favorite memory or gift from the holidays as a kid?
Yeah, so I did see this question before. I had a little bit of time to think about it. The thing that jumps to mind is I was so excited. I saw a commercial for the Dungeons and Dragons electronic, I think it was called the Electronic Labyrinth game, if I remember right. It was like a grid, and it had a pewter dragon and little plastic walls that you would set up. And you had to go through this kind of maze, and I was like obsessed with this game, when I saw the commercial. Didn't think it was very likely I was going to be able to get it, but I told pretty much everybody that might know somebody that might get me a gift that I was interested in this. And I ended up getting it for Christmas, and I was just like over the moon. So that's the one that comes to mind.
Nice. Tom, you want to share yours?
I can't find this game. I mentioned this just recently. I wanted to get one of those I wanted Axis and Allies, but nobody, could give that. But a friend of my father's gave me Fortress America, which blew my mind that there was a game so big and that he was willing to give it up to me. And man, I played the snot out of that game.
Sweet. I did not have a game in mind. I was going to say the big Voltron, the plastic Voltron, but I think the coolest game I ever got as a gift.
Wow, that was a
Quest.
flex. Some of us couldn't afford the big Voltron, Eric. I had the whole Voltron.
Tom.
Huh?
I got it. It's like as individual lions, and eventually I had the whole thing. I
had the whole line, Eric. Actually, my grandmother bought me the whole line, but she wouldn't buy me the pink one because that was for girls, and so I had a one-legged Voltron.
Oh my goodness!
But the lion wasn't pink, just the pilot. Anyway,
the lion was yellow, right? I forget what it was, but yeah, it was a girl pilot. Lion. She's like, "You wouldn't want that." I was like, "I kind of need the whole thing."
Kind of want
yes, that one-legged Voltron is not.
And then my dad said I was being ungrateful, so I shut up.
All right, a library question for your personal collection from Coralie. Now that you have access to the Dice Tower library and all the new games you're reviewing, how has your personal collection changed? What are the criteria that you look at? And what is that je ne sais quoi that a game needs to have to make the cut for your personal collection?
Tom, you want to handle this one?
I don't think it stopped Mike at all. I don't think Mike has changed his thing at all, because everyone will be like, Chris Yee uses the library like it's his own. He comes in there, takes games all the time. Mike looks at a game and goes, I should buy that.
So if you look at things in a continuum, right? You've got Chris or the Yees on one end, and I am probably on the other end. Now, I am a bit unapologetic in this, in the sense that I've always been a collector. That has been an aspect of my personality, and I've never bought a game when I was in a position that it would financially harm me, right? So keeping that out there, almost all of my disposable income, I mean, look at how I dress. Almost all of my disposable income goes into board games, right? And so I have had a much larger collection than I do now. Before, when I lived in Indiana and had a larger home, I had a lot of games. I pared it down quite a bit. It's still, hovering around maybe, I don't know how many games I have right now, maybe 300-ish, which is not small. But I'm trying to get more into a one in, one out. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm working on it. But I've always been a collector. When I worked in music stores, I had thousands of CDs. Well, many of those were promotional. I was able to get them for free, working at the store. But I've always been a collector. That's always been an aspect of my personality. As long as it is not negatively impacting, my family, it's something that brings me joy. So, yes, it has not changed. Was that Coralie that I said? It has not changed very much.
All right.
Tom, what are we seeing from chat?
Bonnie says, how have your gaming tastes changed over time?
So it's a good question. And by implication, every other question asked was terrible.
Got it.
So, I think we've all said this before, but if you're in a hobby long enough, certainly in board gaming, that you go through kind of cyclical changes, right? And right now, my kind of sweet spot, my wheelhouse, are a bit lighter games than maybe I would have gravitated towards in the past. I was, pretty into medium to even sometimes heavyweight Euros. That was my wheelhouse in Indiana most often. But now I'm to the point where I would much rather play something that is low to mid weight, Done in about an hour to an hour and a half. That's my sweet spot right now. Talk to me in a year, and I might be wanting to be playing Lacerdas all the time. I don't know, but right now, I guess so. How my tastes have changed is just they've been all over the place. I've been into heavy games. I've been into lighter games. It just depends on where I'm at that given point in time.
Does it have a lot to do with how much free time you have at the moment?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know that it does. I also have a little bit of I've got a little bit of the hipster in me too, and I was this way with music as well. So I don't think I've ever even told you this, Tom. So Tom, pokes a little bit of good-natured fun at me for if a game comes that if I have to import that game, it's instantly more exciting, right?
Yep.
And there's an element of truth to that because I was the same way with music. I was the same way. I would go out of my way to import an album that I already had because it had a different jacket cover or it had a bonus track, a Japanese only bonus track. I always have loved that stuff. And so I don't know. I also I've used this term before. I'm a bit of a shallow gamer. I like the look and the feel. There, the tactile experience. So all of that hasn't changed, I think, but it has informed what I want to play.
Julian wants to know: is there a game that you have yet to win at least once?
The thing that comes to mind is Ghost Stories. I've never won Ghost Stories. Gosh, there's tons of games that I have not won even once. But I feel like for this question to be really the spirit of the question, it would have to be a game I've played multiple times, right?
Sure.
A lot of games I've played once and lost. Literally hundreds of those. But Ghost Stories is a game I've played multiple times, have not won. Oh, Rising Sun. Also, I've never won. I've been second place. I've gotten second place in Rising Sun before. But I've never won. And I played that many times, too.
Was there a cultural adjustment that you had to make when you moved from Indiana to Florida?
Yes, but maybe not in the way that you might think. There was a much bigger adjustment for me moving to Indiana than there was moving to Florida. Florida, in many ways, reminds me much more of where I grew up. It's very diverse, multicultural. You hear different languages, you smell different foods, hear different music, things along those lines. That's not to say that Indiana is completely homogenous. It's not, but it's certainly not as diverse culturally as Southern California, where I lived most of my growing up, and here in there was a bit of an adjustment, but it was really more like, oh, this is some of those things that I've kind of forgotten about, so kind of bringing back some memories of growing up.
You think it's a coastal versus, interior sort of thing?
It certainly could be. It also could be, you might be right. I don't know. I'm not sure on that. They were both areas, where I grew up in California and here in South Florida. They were both very heavily Spanish speaking. And so I just, I got used to the sounds of Spanish speaking people. I used to watch Spanish TV shows on Univision back in California, just because, I don't know, I just thought it was fun. I never really picked up all that much from that, but it's kind of the same thing here. It's just, I kind of like hearing different sounds, hearing different languages, smelling different smells when you're out, in restaurants and whatever. And yeah.
All right. Last quick question from DH says, what's the game you've played the most that you like the least?
Oh, wow. The game I've played the most that I've liked the least. Oh my goodness. I feel like I should have a quicker answer to this. It would be it would probably be I can't think of the name of the game right now. For some reason, it's escaping me. It's a like a collectible card game.
Magic.
Pokemon.
I could actually answer Magic. Yeah, I'll go with Magic. But it would be, there's a number of collectible card games that I've played a bunch. Those type of games while I can appreciate the design, those games don't work for me. I played Magic. I was never good, but I played it. I played, I even played Pokemon a little bit, but that was mostly with my kids. So yeah, probably something along those lines. Or speaking of that, maybe some games I played with my kids. Like I remember my youngest son got obsessed with Ghostbusters, the board game, the minis board game when that first came out.
Oh yeah.
Not a very good game, but man, did he love it. And so we played it a lot. It was okay. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't my favorite.
Okay.
Well, it's time to talk about games we do like at this point.
Let's do it. We call it 1 and 1. We like to talk about one game that's relatively new and one game that you'd consider an older title. So, Mike, why don't you go first with a new title?
All right. So this is something that I'm going to give a little shout out to Z Garcia for giving me FOMO on this. This is called Lands of Gausser, and it is the newest game from Snowdale, I believe is the name of the production, from Finland, and probably best known for Dale of Merchants, the Dale of Merchants series, a deck building game. Also did a game called Dawn of Peacemakers that Tom and I disagree about. I like it a lot, Tom not so much. But this is a narrative, very narrative forward. I can't stress that enough. But it's not like an overarching story necessarily. It doesn't have a distinct beginning, middle, and end. It's one where it's mostly reading stories, doing little quests, doing dice checks. But the writing is delightful. The look of the game, as all of his games are, is just beautiful, gorgeous, in my opinion, of course. You shouldn't have to say that when you're talking about art, but I've been really taken by a couple of things. One, all of those things I mentioned, but two, the fact that it's one of those games that you are going to essentially play games and you have to save it because if you want to keep going. I usually absolutely hate save systems in board games. They're usually a pain, a huge, massive pain. I don't think I've seen a better save system than in this one. It's like a minute to put it away and a minute to bring it back out. So, Lands of Gausser.
Cool. So I packed a solo game to talk with you about today. This is the latest iteration of the paperback system. This Paperback Adventures. From Tim Fowers. It's the same idea where you're building cards, building your deck, and forming words out of those cards, but now you're facing some sort of enemy with hit points and a programmed turn structure. So you know that on this turn, they're going to block a certain amount of damage and then come after you. And so you can prepare to do that and maybe spell a word and splay it in a direction that's going to block that attack, or go to town on the guy and try and take off as many hit points as possible. There's a lot to explore here because not only is there a base box, there's 3 different characters. Each character has a different starting deck and different cards to draft and different items to use. And as you defeat the bad guy, you unlock more stuff. I'm really enjoying the exploration of this game. It is not a fast game, though. It's at least, it says 90 minutes on the box. It's going to be longer than that as you figure out all the mechanisms. It's got a little
for solo.
Because you're facing 6 enemies in order to do a full play, and each enemy has like an A mode and a B mode. So you knock them down to 0 once and they flip, and you knock them down to 0 and they're defeated. And same thing with the next one and the next one. And each time you defeat an enemy, you get a chance to buy cards. And so there's less adding cards to your deck and system here. It's much more of a campaign adventure. But I'm enjoying the quest. It's not an easy game either. Paperback Adventures is pretty cool.
All right, I talked a lot about, I played a ton of Frosthaven over the weekend, so I'm going to talk about Heat. This is the opposite of Frost. Heat, pedal to the metal. This is a racing game from Days of Wonder, and which has many people saying Days of Wonder's back. Sort of. This is designed by the same guys who did Flamme Rouge. Which I did not like. But I think it matters. This is a very different game than Flamme Rouge. In Flamme Rouge, it's all about positioning. In Heat, it's about pressing the gas down as fast as you can, as fast as you dare. And in fact, I think it's legit to say that Heat is a better Formula D.
Wow.
Well,
I wouldn't argue.
There's a lot of similarities between the two in the sense that you're going as fast as you can, and when you get to a curve, you want to slow down. But with Heat, I've gone around the whole track in 10 minutes, and it feels like a racing game. You feel, when you go fast in Heat, you feel like you're going fast. It feels awesome.
Yes.
And if you spin out, it's kind of like Mario Kart. You're like, oh, man. And then you get back on the track and keep going. My kids actually were like, the penalty seems kind of low. And I said, well, and I compared it to Mario Kart, and they were like, oh, yeah. And once you play the game, you spin out, you could, lose because of that because you messed up at the wrong time. But it's essentially a deck building game where you're adding and taking heat out of your deck consistently. You add heat to your deck to do cool things, but then you need to get it out of your deck because it's worthless, in fact, detrimental when it's in your deck.
Okay.
And I like it. It's a good, solid family weight game that I could see becoming pretty popular, actually.
I agree.
Cool. So that's Heat. Mike, how about an older title that you played recently?
All right. So if you'll allow me, Tom, what would you say right now is your least favorite development in board games over the last maybe 2 years, 1 or 2 years? I'm putting you on the spot. We complain about it, you and I, but you especially all the time.
The size of boxes.
There you go. So the game that I'm going to be talking about is Museum, and the reason why I've always liked Museum. I know that Tom, I don't think you like it as much, but I've always liked Museum, and I had all the expansions, and the big box, the Museum big box came in recently, which was Truth in Advertising. It's a gigantic box, and it has a new expansion as well, but it's mostly a storage system, and so I spent the better part of 2 hours taking the original Museum and all of the expansions and putting in the new cards where you had to get rid of, we changed these cards, so get rid of those cards. And that's, so I spent a lot of time with that. And I'm like, if I'm going to spend better part of 2 hours sorting this game out, I'm going to play it. So I also played it, and I enjoy it. I mean, it has one thing that bothers me about it, and that's that you spend so much time at the end of the game rearranging your Museum because basically you're placing works of art on your little player board in front of you. And it doesn't matter where you put them throughout the game. You could literally just put them on your board. It doesn't matter. At the end of the game, everyone has a chance and will put their head down and spend 10 to 15 minutes arranging it in the optimal way.
It's closer to five, folks, for most people, but yes.
Yeah, I wish there was a more elegant way to handle that, but I like the game enough that I'm willing to overlook that. So, Museum.
So over the Thanksgiving holiday, I got to play a few games with the family, and one of the ones that I brought along because I hadn't played it in a while was Bang the Dice Game, the dice variant of the classic card game where you've got the sheriff and the deputy and the outlaws, and everybody's got a secret role, and you're flinging bangs at each other and trying to take out whoever you're against. The outlaws are trying to take out the sheriff, and the sheriff is trying to take out the bad guys, and the renegade is playing for themselves. And we played several rounds of the dice game and just had a blast because, each round is maybe 15, 20 minutes and it just moves at a really good clip. And liked the hidden rolls. I felt it may be a little thin because, the luck of the dice can really play a huge part in what you're able to do. And so we were like, well, we haven't played the card game version in a while. And so we pulled that out, the original Bang, and relearned the rules and got all set up. And the difference was striking in playtime. Whereas each of the dice game rounds was, like I said, 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 at the most. I think it took us a couple of hours, maybe an hour and a half, to get through our full play. It was maybe a 6-player game of Bang. Because there's just so much more buildup and blocking, and somebody shoots at you, and you can duck, and you can dodge, and you can play a missed card, and there's all these special powers that affect everything. It just moved so much more slowly. Yes, there was more to it, more meat on the bone, but it just took so much longer, and it was a tremendous illustration of why folks tend to say that the dice game is the better version of the system. You can just get that whole thing done a lot faster with the dice game than you can with the original card game.
All right, so on Friday, I determined to have a Black Friday gaming day that I meant to play a lot of new games on, and instead just went back and played a lot of classics, or just games I already knew how to play. And one of them is Project Delete, which I believe is not that old. I guess like the newest version of it came out in 2020, but then it came out several years before that, because I've been playing Project Delete for a while. What a blast this game is. Although this is a game in which you're just running through and shooting aliens. So I was playing with 3 people who never played before. And so I played the extermination or demolition mission on the one board on easy level. And I know it's easy level. I always play with people on easy at first because the game doesn't seem easy. You flip over and you're like, here's 30 aliens. Have fun. And so then, we can make it harder once you get to know it. But I'm going to need to make it harder for these people because they destroyed. We killed almost every alien. There were rounds where we were like, there's no aliens to kill. We can do what we want. And I've never had that happen before. So next time, They're getting medium. Medium with more bosses and more aliens. But, man, I'll tell you what. The Project Elite it really sings. It's such... I wish there was more slightly timed cooperative games, by which I mean there's 2 minutes of like frenziness in Project Elite, then you stop, you take stock, and you go to the next spot. It's not just 10 minutes and then the game's over, or it's not long periods of timed. I don't know, that punctuated burst of energy is good for the soul.
You like this better than the XCOM board game?
I'm never going to play the XCOM board game again, and I don't mean that in a negative way as much as the XCOM board game was neat. I liked it in its time. This is XCOM, and the XCOM game hasn't aged very well, while this one I think has.
Okay, cool.
This is a big hole in my gaming. I haven't played that one yet.
Well, you should have come on Friday because we played it.
I
know.
I know.
You missed out.
I blew it.
If only there was a library that you could visit.
That's true.
Well, Mike, we've reached the end of another hour, and I appreciate you hanging out with us. This has been a blast. I know folks can see more of you right here on this very channel, but if they want to go outside the Dice Tower bubble, where can they find out more about Mike Dilisio?
Really, Dice Tower is the place to be. If you do want to listen to a questionable at best podcast that at least is supposed to be about board games, you can listen to Sporadically Bored with Mike and Dan, with Dan Hughes, and that is on the Dice Tower Network, shockingly somehow still on the Dice Tower Network. But that's about it. Other than that, right here, the place to be, the Dice Tower.
Excellent.
Well, there you go, folks. We'll also, if you're coming to PAX, we'll see you in 4 days, starting Friday. I mean, we'll be there Thursday. You might catch a glimpse of us eating a cheesesteak on Thursday. But starting Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we'll be at our booth, which you think I would have looked up by now and still haven't. But we're there. Look for Dice Tower in your program guide and come by because there's a contest running and you can see all the games that are going to be in the bag there. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
And I'm Eric Summerer.
And you've been watching At the Table with Tom and Eric.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you again in 1 week and 1 day when our guest will be Jeff Engelstein. At the Table is produced by Tom and me with assistance from Roy Kennedy, Wendy Yee, and Chris Yee. Affection from the winner of the Westminster Dog Show provided by Pro Licks. And support for everything on the Dice Tower comes from viewers and listeners like you. Reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter, or to tom@dicetower.com or eric@dicetower.com. Until we see you again, from all of us at the table, have fun gaming.